Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here and welcome to this third panel of the series on changing the tide in transportation. We are very pleased that CUTSI continues to receive support from ASHTO, ATBA, ASCE, and ENO for this webinar series. Let me see if I can go down. I should be able to, but I'm having some problems here. So let me actually, okay, there we go. So I won't go over the objectives of the series. I have already talked about this in the past, but we really would like to be more inclusive in our representation on the CUTSI Executive Committee, but more importantly, expand our horizons in our research, in our education, as well as in our community engagement activities. And we hope that through the series, we'll be able to come up with some tangible initiatives that we can all practice in our individual UTCs and as CUTSI as an organization. So in the first webinar, we had a discussion of lived-in experiences from a panel of national leaders. The second webinar, we focused on defining the problem as it pertains to Black Americans and what actions are being considered at a federal level. Now, this third webinar is going to be in some ways closer to what we do as UTCs. So how can we as UTCs create a supportive community? And in particular, three aspects in terms of what can we do in our university for mentoring, recruiting, retention, development for underrepresented minority students, but also many of our UTCs do K-12 research, and we already partake in community support and engagement. So there'll be more of a discussion of these issues. The fourth webinar will be held on May 20th, 11 to 12:30 US Central Time. Please mark this down on your calendar. And our moderator for today will be speaking a little bit more to, about the fourth webinar toward the end of this panel. I would like to acknowledge the dedication of the steering committee members who really stood up the series. P.S. Sriraj, Melissa Tooley, Carol Abel-Lewis, Juan Matthew, and Kamel Kamga. And thanks also to Tracy Ulberg, who handles all the logistics and organization and keeps us in the right spirit. So thank you, Tracy. So I'm very pleased to introduce the moderator for today's panel, our very own Carol Abel-Lewis. Carol is a professor in transportation and the emeritus director of the Center for Transportation Research at Texas Southern University, which is historically a Black college and university. We have had the pleasure here at UT Austin of working closely with Carol over many years, and we know just too well her passion to educate students in the fundamentals of urban transportation issues, as well as in policy-related considerations. He currently serves as the chair of PRB's DEI committee. So, Carol, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate today's panel. Before I hand it over to Carol, to all attendees, please do mute your microphones, and please know that this session is being recorded. As the panel discussion proceeds, please feel free to type any comments, any questions you have in the Q&A box, and Carol will try to relay those questions to the panelists and engender some discussions on those topics. With that, Carol, it is all yours. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Chandra. I appreciate the introduction, and it's just a pleasure to be here with you all today. Again, transparency, inclusion, equity, diversity. That's what we're talking about in our TIDE series. So Chandra has introduced this extremely well. Just to kind of remind you, we're going to talk today about how to create that supportive environment, about retention, about inclusion, about how we actually recruit into our wonderful transportation arena. I'm joined today by Hau Hagedorn and Thomas Carter, known throughout the world as TC, so we'll call him that today. And I'm going to introduce them to you. Hau Hagedorn is an experienced transportation professional and administrator who knows how to develop and grow research and education programs. As the Associate Director of Transportation Research Education Center, TREC, her goals include increasing diversity in the academy and transportation workforce. She serves on several governor-appointed transportation advisory boards in Oregon and actively participates in national efforts on conducting and implementing transportation research. She holds a BS in Civil Engineering from the University of Minnesota and Master's in Public Administration from Portland State University. Welcome, Hau. You all are going to really enjoy hearing from her. TC serves as the Assistant Dean for Academic and Student Affairs in the College of Engineering at the University of Arkansas. He is the campus coordinator for the NSF Arkansas Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, known as ARC-LSAMP. He co-directs the Engineering Career Awareness Program. He will celebrate 35 years at the University of Arkansas in June of this year. And when we hear from TC, you're going to hear about programs that they've initiated really decades ago. So more than a decade's worth of experience that we'll be able to draw from him. So thank you for being here with us today. In our time today, I'll serve as panelist and moderator. And so I'm going to start our conversation, and then we'll have TC to follow me, and then Hau. In the early stages of planning for this series, our steering committee spoke about how to create this conducive environment for our campuses. It all kind of grew out of the George Floyd murder last summer and the attention that was paid to how we in the university environment maybe address some of the systematic issues that have plagued us. And so that's, the thinking behind, moving forward and how can we address these things. And so when talking about something like that, it's sort of natural to reflect on one's own experience. And so I thought I'd take a second to share with you how I got here. I think I want you to kind of focus my comments in the areas of recruitment, and inclusion and retention. I'll start by saying I'm an example of why and how open doors matter. In 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed, Congress appropriated funds to all 50 states for Black students. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. The state above Missouri is Iowa. Iowa had more money than it had Black people. So they recruited from my high school in Chicago. As part of the initiative, I set off to Iowa to be an elementary school teacher. I didn't know any engineers. I didn't know any urban planners. I had no thought about the career that I now love so much. Now, to tell you the truth, my freshman boyfriend said he was going to be an urban planner. I thought that sounded pretty cool. So I decided, okay, well, let me check that out. And that's really how it started. Urban planning is a graduate degree, and at Iowa, there are only 2 undergraduate courses you can take. I took both of those. I love them. I went to the department chair and said, I want to take more. So he actually set up an independent study for me all by myself to continue in this arena. I love it. So the difference is that if I had gone anywhere else, I probably would be teaching 3rd grade right now, probably retired, because I don't think I could have stayed in 3rd grade as long as I stayed in transportation. And so we'll look forward to, oh my goodness. So we'll look forward to, the opportunity to have a long continued career in this environment. Undoubtedly, there's scores of people who never, like me, when I got to Iowa, I had never spoken really to a white person. So that's the second part of my story, really. There were 400 Black students out of 20,000 student body. And so I had never talked to really anybody white my own age. And I'm sure that the students there, many of them had probably never talked to anybody Black. And so when we talk about retention and recruitment, the question is, what in the world is it that makes a student who's one of 400 out of 20,000 feel like they belong there. And so, you know, as we in our academic units, especially those who are in majority universities, think about how to do that, you know, sort of recognizing that you probably have some students in your environment, some Black students who've maybe never been around white people. I went to a Black high school, a Black middle school. My church was Black, my community was Black. And so really there was no opportunity there. And so when you think about, these are the people who are coming into your environment, and the same is true on the other side. You know, white students are coming into the environments never having had interaction with people their own age who are other ethnicities. And so we sort of think about the word systemic, and I think we can see that systemic sort of racism, the exclusion from the environments in which we come, really contributes to what we see when we get to our universities. And so it leads to sort of these practices and behaviors that in a way sort of nourish continuing just to hang among ourselves. And so that we as professors can do in that environment is to create sort of ad hoc opportunities for students to mingle so that they can get to know each other. And so that, you know, the Black students get invited to coffee and to be in the study groups too. So I think the takeaways, again, from a little introduction, the first is exposure and just being there. You know, my being at Iowa to have that undergraduate introduction to urban planning really just opened my world. And then the second is understanding that when we bring students into environments like that, it is important for us to make sure that there's something there that makes them feel as if they belong, as we think about retention and that whole feeling of inclusion. So that leads, I think, to continued conversation about why it even matters. And so, to my way of thinking, it matters because we want people to be at their highest and best use. Some might argue that my highest and best use might have been a third grade teacher. I actually think my highest and best use is what I'm doing now. And I might not have gotten that had those doors not been open for me. So TC is a door opener. And so I'm going to baton hand to him. And he's going to talk to you about what they've been doing at University of Arkansas to recruit and to open those doors. So TC, if you take it now.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Again, it is indeed a pleasure for me to present to you all today on the activities that we are undertaking here at the University of Arkansas. And the program that I'd like to talk about is called our ECAP program. And ECAP stands for Engineering Career Awareness Program. And we started this program back in 2007. And so we are actually bringing in our 15th cohort of students this summer. But we wanted to build a community of students, of underrepresented students in the College of Engineering, and so that when they got here, they would not feel isolated or alone in the classroom or lost on campus. And so the way we went about recruiting students, they had to receive a university scholarship, which was not a full scholarship. It was just a partial scholarship. And they had to have an EFC below the cost of attendance to attend the University of Arkansas. And a lot of the students that we recruited or were selected were Pell eligible. To make the selection, we invited the students to campus for a weekend. And along with the students, we invited their parents and family to come with them. And they would spend the weekend here and they would interview for the program. And again, we wanted to build a community. And in order to do that, we thought it was important that the parents and the family of the students got involved in that process. And so after we made our selections, we would interview up to anywhere from 30 to 40 students each year for the program. And again, this is all pre-COVID. COVID really has thrown a wrench into some of our processes. But we invited the families here and we interviewed the students on a Saturday morning, and we were able to talk about the process of the program, the process of going through the engineering education cycle. And once the students were selected, they had to participate in a summer bridge program. It was 3 weeks during the month of June, and all expenses paid, even the interview weekend, all expenses paid. And during the summer bridge program, we focused on campus resources. So we met every day in a classroom and we talked about campus resources. We had people from campus come in and visit with the students. We talked about the catalog of studies. We talked about academic integrity. We talked about study skills. We had people from the Multicultural Center come in and talk about activities that they had available to students. And then we did some fun things during the 3 weeks. We spent a day at an amusement park up in Branson. And we also took industrial tours during the 3 weeks. So we'd schedule at least 2 tours a week, and we would go out to the companies that hire engineers, our engineers, and they had an opportunity to see what engineers do in the workplace firsthand and talk to those engineers. So that was a 3-week summer program. Then they left, of course, and then they would come back and start the fall semester. We bought their books for them every semester, so they didn't have to worry about how they were going to pay for books. And when I say we bought their books, we didn't just send them to the bookstore and pick up their books. We actually got a list of all their classes, sent that to the bookstore. We purchased the books. The bookstore sent them to our office, and we sorted the books for the students so that, again, all they had to do was come by, pick up the books. So again, we're trying to remove barriers for students that a lot of freshmen face coming in, not knowing where to go, the resources, purchasing books. And one of the other components of the program during the academic years, they would have to meet with me on a weekly basis. And what it turned out to be was, instead of once a week, I was seeing students multiple times during the day. They would come and hang out in the office, and they would study here in the office with other students. They'd come in and, again, just hang out. Students were also assigned a peer mentor, and usually it's an upperclassman. And once we had a couple of cohorts of ECAP students, that peer mentor is an upper class ECAP student. So again, our freshmen are mentored by our upper class ECAP students. We also had a monthly dinner series where we'd all come together and meet once a month as a group, and it would be over dinner. And then we would invite companies to come in and present to the students during that time about internship opportunities, about co-ops, as well as full-time opportunities. So let's fast forward 10 years, and now we have a student center for our students, for our ECAP students, and it's sponsored by one of our corporate sponsors. And we have corporate sponsors that come in on an annual basis during the semesters and talk to our ECAP students. So again, we built a community. We have a steady state of students. Right now, we have 83 students that are in the program, freshmen through senior year. And it's all about making sure the students have the resources they need to be successful. There is a scholarship. Right now, we pay up to $5,000 a year, $2,500 per semester for the students. In the earlier years of ECAP, we paid off their unpaid balance. So if a student had a balance for the semester, we went in and made sure that balance was paid off for them. Some of the things that are required of the students during the summer, we expect them to do an internship, paid internship with one of our hopefully corporate sponsors. If not, any corporate internship that's available. Or they could do a summer REU, research experience for undergraduates, where they would go and do research at another school, and that is a paid opportunity as well. Or some of them actually do REUs here on our campus. And we also would help with them with study abroad opportunities. So we would partially fund their study abroad experience. And then we also have some students that will do summer school because we do know that they do have to keep a scholarship. They do have to have a GPA to keep their scholarships. And sometimes after the spring semester, they find that they're a little short on GPA or maybe short on hours. So they can go to summer school and make up those hours of GPA in order to keep the scholarship. We also have partnered with some historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. A few of them that are most notable: Fort Valley State University out of Georgia, Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And that provides us with a steady state of transfer students that are part of ECAP as well. And they have all the benefits coming in as ECAP students that we recruit as entering freshmen. And I've uploaded some, at least there's some links to our ECAP website. There's also a link to some of the awards that ECAP has earned over the years. There's also a link to the publications, which our fact book here in the College of Engineering, and that will tell the story in terms of our retention rates, our graduation rates, and it highlights a couple students each year that are part of ECAP. And then there's there's an alum who came to us from Fort Valley State University, and I put a link to an article about him. He actually came back and did a talk here 2 years ago. And he started a organization called STEM is the New Black. And that article talks about his experience going to Fort Valley, making the transition here to University of Arkansas and participating in ECAP. I think that will be beneficial. And I'm not gonna belabor my presentation because I do have a counterpart that's also going to present, but I will be glad to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you so much, TC. And through your program, we can really feel how that inclusion and the mentoring and the links and the making the students feel comfortable and like they're a part. All of those touches are critical to keeping those students in those spots that you've recruited them to. All right, so we're going to look forward to having some time to talk with you a little more in just a second. At this point, Hau is going to talk to us, and we're going to do a little shifting from the student aspect to what we as faculty and staff can do. So Hau, if you would go ahead and take it from here, please.
Yeah, great. I know, Carol, you had mentioned that this will be a conversation and we should avoid PowerPoints, but in order for me to sort of sort and frame the discussion, I felt like I needed to be able to share some slides with the folks because I think it's important because I'm going to zoom back out and talk about what TREC as a transportation center, sort of the process that we went through to embark on trying to figure out the role of UTCs in advancing racial equity in the academy and transportation. So I just have a few slides that I'm going to share to talk about our process. So I'm going to share it right now, just so it's a little bit easier for me to talk about, present mode. So as a response to the George Floyd murder, I think at that point, a lot of universities as well as corporations and individuals and organizations were issuing sort of statements, right? And we felt compelled to also speak up and say something. However, at the time, we felt like we couldn't make a statement without it feeling performative unless we had specific actions and goals that we as a transportation center could back up those statements. And so last summer, we started on this journey to develop an anti-racism plan for our organization. And we started that out by talking about, well, in order to develop this plan, what are some of the guiding principles that we as a staff will use in order to sort of build out that plan. And so we came together as a staff and had some really tough conversations about racism and the impact of just police violence and everything else, and institutional racism, and decided that we would come together under 4 guiding principles. The first is to collaborate. That is that we include every single staff member at TREC in the development of this plan and the implementation of the plan. We will also draw on faculty, students, and external partners. Another thing that we recognize is that we were not experts in equity inclusion. And so from that perspective, we probably would likely draw on and partner with and promote the work of others. And so this concept of elevating the voices who are the experts in these areas was something that we felt was really important to underscore the work that we were moving forward. And also this notion of compensating folks for their work. We value their expertise. And so anytime we would ask somebody to help us do the work, we would compensate them. And then the last guiding principle was that we're in this process to learn and to get it right and not to necessarily be right. And so we had to do this work because if you look at Portland and the demographics of our community, it is a predominantly white community. And so if we weren't going to do the work, who was going to do the work in this area? So the other thing that we talked about is, as you'll hear throughout the conversation, is what language and what words do we use to frame the groups of people that we're talking about. And we landed on Black, Indigenous, people of color to refer to non-white groups of people. And we recognize that this is not perfect. We've read many articles, listened to podcasts about the pros and cons of using, this one term to define a group of people. But we agreed that BIPOC was the best term to use at this point in time. And so that's the rationale for seeing that term. And this term may be new to some folks, but that's what we're using throughout our journey. And then the goals. We actually had 2 very specific goals. One is to contribute to changing the transportation profession to be anti-racist and promote racial justice through lifelong learning. And that is the continuum, K through 12, through university, and then the transportation profession beyond the academy. And then the second was to ensure that our transportation research activities contribute to advancing equity and justice and challenge institutional racism. And we decided that we're going to do this by looking at certain categories of work. And so in order to improve the transportation profession, we're going to look at improving the transportation courses, supporting our BIPOC faculty and students, and ensuring that the events that we put on, the professional developments and technology transfer events, are equitable, inclusive, et cetera. And as you can see under these pillars, we do have specific actions. Last summer, we felt like there were 3 specific actions that we can do right away. We host a Friday transportation seminar, and last fall, we decided that the focus for the transportation seminar would be transportation equity. And also, we put forth an effort to ensure that the speakers that we invited to share their knowledge represented the diversity of folks and the experiences that can reflect on transportation equity, racial equity in transportation. Dr. Jennifer Dill also embarked on developing a resource list for faculty. She worked closely with Jesus Barajas from UC Davis and Kendra Levine from UC Berkeley to develop an exhaustive, it's a 47-page long transportation syllabi resource list the link is on the website that transportation faculty can use to incorporate into their transportation courses. We were also hosting a transportation summer camp, which I know many of the UTCs also host. And we took that opportunity to actually refocus the curriculum to center racial equity. So rather than pretending that institutional racism didn't exist, we took it head on and talked about the racist planning and origins of planning in Oregon. So for example, it's no wonder that there aren't a lot of people of color in Oregon, because it was illegal for Blacks to live in Oregon. And so we talked about that with the students, and really tried to integrate, to talk about the fact that you cannot talk about transportation without talking about race. I also want to highlight Action 4, which is currently underway right now. This is something that we're working really hard on. So we decided that in order to really change the academy, we have to look at the curriculum that we are teaching. And so we are working on convening a racial equity education advisory committee. So professors from across the country that can provide some advice on how to change the curriculum to really integrate some of these topics into the transportation engineering and planning courses. The very first step that we're going to do in-house, that one of my colleagues here at TREC is going to work on, is to develop an introduction to racial equity and social justice for transportation planners and engineers module. And this module, we will share the module with folks after it's developed. Through our national UTC, we are trying to develop curriculum resources. So it could be syllabi, case studies, data sources, assignments, and in-class exercise and modules. We are asking the faculty from our 6 university consortium to develop some modules and then also to test it in their courses. And the hope is that these modules will be developed this summer to be introduced into courses as soon as this winter or spring of this upcoming year. And again, these resources are intended to be shared with folks from across the country, and it's not so. The second goal that we have is to look at our research activities and just challenge the institutional racism that may be embedded in the processes and at every stage of the research cycle. And so so there's 2 prongs to that. The first is to just support research that addresses racism and supports racial justice in transportation. And so how do we go about doing that? NITSE does prioritize that, and that's one thing that we feel like we have done in the past, but we also recognize that we need to do more of that in order to really challenge the institutional racism. And then just looking at how can we improve our research processes at every stage. So one of our partners, UT Arlington, they actually do a double-blind peer review process to sort of take away that bias from who gets the funding. And so we're looking at our research processes to see how those can be challenged. And then there's this accountability and transparency piece. So we did not want to do this work. We want to hold ourselves accountable for doing the work and being transparent with what it is that we do. And so from that aspect, there's this large communications piece. And so we are sharing what we are doing through our website, and we have been updating our actions on a quarterly basis, just to make sure that we are accountable for doing what we say we're doing. And then there's this piece of operations. So we cannot do this work unless we build the capacity within our staff and our faculty and our students to understand what it means to address racism And so we try to support training for our staff as well as others around this area. And I think the last slide I have is, so I had mentioned the summer camp that we held this past summer. And I just wanted to read a couple of reflections from the students because transportation equity was such a core, it was a lens through which they experienced the camp. And so the first reflection was, the range of people who live here in Portland is so wide and diverse, and as a result, it means there's a variety of needs to be met. To create an equitable transportation system means to be able to cater to the important needs of everyone without leaving out any one group of people, especially the populations that are vulnerable and not currently being equally serviced by the transportation system. And the second comment that we got was, I didn't expect to learn about justice in relation to transportation. I honestly didn't realize how much they were connected, which is why I'm blessed to have a part in this camp. And I'm ending with that just to share that it is hard to have these conversations, but I think the students are ready for it. And if they don't have the conversation earlier on in their education, I think it's harder to have those conversations later on. And so don't be afraid to talk about transportation equity and justice, because it is such a critical part of the work that we do, and we all have a role in making things better. And that's all I had, Carol.
Okay, thank you, Hal. And I think as we listen to her, we can hear all the facets and avenues by which they're approaching this really critical question. And so I think it really gives us a lot of ideas to take forward. The thing she said that I think is hugely important is that it is hard. And in other conversations she and I have had, we also talked about the fact that it's not going to happen overnight. So, you know, we're taking these little bitty bites out of this giant elephant. And I think we all want to continue doing that. So thanks to both of you for all we learned from you. I would like to ask all of our attendees to look in the chat box. Tracy has put both the link to the CUTSI website where you can refer to all of the particular programs that you've heard about today, as well as the request that if you have something that you'd like to share on the website, you can send it to her, and her email address is there. So thank you for that, Tracy. All right, so let's start with the questions. I'm going to start with one from the audience, and I think I'm going to kind of marry it with one I have, TC. They asked, were there concerns about who was not selected to the program, and what kind of impact did that have on candidates and their families? Also kind of paired to that, if you got retention statistics and who provides funding. And then so all of that sort of wrapped into you know, how you identify these students. If you could address that for us, please.
Sure. So yes, we did. Of course, students that weren't selected, some of them still came to the university. We had some who actually were, you know, using us as a litmus test to see what we could provide, and some of them that weren't selected, we kind of saw through that during the interview process, and they went to other universities. Those that weren't selected and still came here, of course, we still kept our hands on them, and they still interacted with our ECAP students and participated in some of the ECAC activities that we had. As far as the retention data, if you will go to the link of our publications, our fact book will list all of that. We have all of our graduation rates as well as retention data for the ECAP program. It's in the fact book. And as I mentioned, there are several highlights of students from the ECAP program as well.
Okay.
Did I answer the entire question there?
Who provides funding?
So funding initially was done by the dean. He made the commitment to fund the program the first couple of years, and then we received an NSF grant. It was a $600,000 grant that we received early on, and then we Walmart donated, and then after that, here recently, we are currently receiving differential tuition that funds the program.
Right, great, thank you. So I think this question to Hau is an interesting one, and it's is the curriculum that you're pursuing, does it tackle any machine or learning or artificial intelligence, looking for those biases there?
Yeah, so I would say yes, like we have discussed that that is an area where racial equity is a huge concern. But in this first round, I don't know if we're tackling that. But I think it's certainly an area that could use some work. And for those faculty that work in that area, I would encourage you to look at how you can improve your curriculum and then perhaps share it with others that are working in this area too.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask this question. Hau and TC, when you first started your programs, what challenges or hindrances did you face in getting the programs just kicked off? Maybe TC, you want to start?
Sure. I guess one of the challenges when we first started was we had to make sure there was actually a demand for students who wanted to actually do that. And so through our recruitment office, we found out that yes, there is a demand, as well as how were we going to, one, make the funding that we have, spread it out so that we could make an impact on our retention and graduation rates. And so we were able to do that by utilizing scholarships that the students were already receiving from the university, and that's why it was imperative that they have to have a university scholarship. And we used our diversity scholarships within the university, which at the time were the Silas Hunt and the Razorback Bridge scholarships. So student had to get one of those. And then of course we used financial aid as well. And we told students to turn down student loans. And then we paid off their unpaid balance. So at the beginning, that was a challenge. And then, of course, as we really got into it, it became a lot easier. And then we also at the beginning of the program, we gave students money to go and purchase their books. And so that was a challenge. And we thought, we can do this a little better than that. And instead of having the students go and stand in line and buy books, why don't we just pull their classes, send the list to the bookstore, and then have them delivered to us. So again, those were some of the early challenges, and now it runs very smoothly.
Okay, thank you. Hau?
Yeah, so from our perspective, so our approach is applying equity to everything that we do. And I think a challenge that we as a transportation center face is that where our unit sits within the university is under the Office of Research and Graduate Studies. And so we are not connected to academic units directly. So we don't necessarily have the direct influence on students as well as faculty. And Carol, you're nodding, so you probably understand how that works. And so the challenge for us is, how do you create these resources, share these opportunities with students, and engage with them in a way that academic units can, versus like the standalone transportation center. So we're grappling with, how do you develop these relationships and create a culture of belonging and a sense of identity? And we want to get to where TC is with his program. And so one of the things that we talked about is we'd love to be able to provide a physical space for these students to come together. That's something that will help with creating a community and belonging. And so it's trying to build these pieces of support without being embedded in the academic units, which is a bit of a challenge for us, but not insurmountable, but a challenge.
So one of the questions, we have two questions that actually kind of roll into one. I think it's really important. I sort of tried to get at it when I ended my comments. The question is, we've seen backlash in some educational settings and in society as a whole, pushback about emphasis on structural racism and equity and racial justice. And so let's hear some thinking about that, both from Hau and TC. How do you respond to some of that? And I would say one of the points I was trying to make is that the reason it's important is that society as a whole will be better if everybody is at their maximum, optimum, sort of best use. And if people can't get to that, then society loses. In my example, and like I said, this is debatable, but I would have probably been a third grade teacher. And I consider my contributions in the transportation arena to educating students, to contributing to the transportation system in Houston, Texas, and really working with TRB on, just not just diversity and inclusion, but other TRB initiatives. I was on the land use committee for, 8 years. And so I think my ultimate and highest use was actually what I'm doing now. And I would not have done this if the door had not been open for me like it was. So, but I also want to hear TC and Hau, what's the answer to that? And Hau, I guess you can talk about if you've had any pushback already. But TC, you want to start and then we'll go to Hau?
Sure. So again, my perspective is, regardless who you are, where you come from, if you come here to the university and you say you want to major in engineering, we're going to make that happen for you, unless at some point you decided it's not working. But we have students who start out in college algebra and make it through graduation with an engineering degree. We have students who face obstacles in the classroom from instructors or students who feel like they shouldn't be here. So again, our office is a safe space for those students. If you're having issues, come in, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get down to the bottom of it. Because if you come here and you want to get an engineering degree, we're going to make sure that happens for you. Okay. And we're going to try to remove all the obstacles so that can happen. So we recently, it's a couple of years old now, but we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee here in the College of Engineering. And again, we're trying to level the playing field for anyone who comes here, regardless of where they come from or who they are, their ethnicity. We want to make it a level playing field for them to succeed.
Okay. Hau?
Yeah, I think part of this is, the more I reflect and the more I read about sort of the events that are happening in the world, a lot of this is about the fact that I think Black and Brown people are seen as less than other, right? Or it's the dehumanizing aspect of Black and Brown students. And I think we have to have these conversations to make people understand that we are all human, right? And so removing the barriers. And I know that when we've had some of these conversations, I think one student said, we're spending too much time on talking about the politics. I'm like, this is not political. This is a human rights issue. And unless if we don't talk about it, we can't continue down this path where, we continue to discriminate and the institution, and it's embedded in our institutions. And I think academia, where we focus on meritocracy and some of these things that really continue to uphold the institutional racism, we have to dismantle that in order to allow to level the playing field, right? And so TC, you talk about supporting students from whatever background and where they're coming from. Universities are not set up to always do that. We're set up to only to support the brightest and the best students, the students that start like at the starting line, whereas many of these students are starting like 100 yards back from the starting line. And so how do we get those students to the same point? And it's really difficult for a lot of people to grasp that concept. And so it's hard, it's difficult, but I do think that if we don't talk about these issues and these things, these barriers, then we can't fix them.
So I think that there are some questions coming in, and I guess part of this is that it's going to sort of depend on people's orientation, right? Everybody is coming from a place where they have their own biases. And so if someone is coming to the table wanting to think that all the conversation about equity and so forth is overblown, it's probably going to be hard to make them think otherwise. But I think that, you know, if you actually get into what goes on and you know, what are some of the systemic things that we're talking about, we're you know, researchers, and so we like numbers and statistics, and I don't have that, but I have an anecdote for you, and let me give you one. I live in a neighborhood that's majority, you know, African American. The neighborhood school did not offer advanced math. It had algebra 1 and algebra 2, but calculus wasn't even offered to these students. And so how can you then get to the university and compete if you've come from a high school that doesn't even offer you the highest level of math? And so, you know, it's that kind of environment that a lot of students are coming from, and why we need to have the conversations about what Hal called, you know, sort of leveling the playing field. But it's not just leveling, it's allowing people who are starting behind the start line to get to the start line. And so, again, not one conversation. We'll have to have more conversations about this. But I think the questions about what does it mean and what is institutional racism and how is it embedded in our institutions? And so I'll give you, now this is Hal's. Hal and I had a conversation before, so I'm gonna give you one that she gave me. So when they're looking for students to provide sort of research assistantships to, and they ask a professor, and the professors just basically always give them the students who happen to be white, right? So if the faculty are giving the recommendations and the faculty aren't sensitized to really, you know, getting to know all of the students, and here's, you know, the thing that I just kind of mentioned, maybe your Black student would be fine and would be great, but you've never talked to that student because the student is shy and never comes to the front of the class and never has an individual conversation with you. So you might not actually recognize all that student may have to offer, you know. And so some of that is what we could call a bit of, I don't know if institutional biases might be too strong for it, but it might be behavior and practice, you know, that sort of leads us to do what we always do, as opposed to reaching out and trying to do things a little differently than we've done in the past. So I think we might be rounding out to the end of our time. We might try to take one more question that we've got in here, and it is, how can, and we'll kind of Hal and TC, I know we don't have a lot of time, but how would you suggest to folks that they get the message to the larger institution about what you're doing and maybe how you're doing it? And would that be of value? So
repeat the question for me. How do we?
Yeah, so the larger institution, so you're in the school, you're in the College of Engineering, right?
Yes.
So I actually came from urban planning. So we do need engineers for sure, but is there an importance to getting the larger university to kind of get this message as well?
Yeah, I can speak to that example. So
Okay.
TREC embarked on our own effort, but in parallel, the Research and Graduate Studies Office did their own work to look at how they can address racial equity and you know, systemic racism within what they do. And then similarly, both the College of Engineering and I believe urban planning alumni students actually sent letters to both colleges and demanded some actions and response. And so both are also embarking on their own journey to address some of these issues that students have raised as you know, based on their experience at Portland State University. And I'm happy to report that both colleges are working on addressing some of those issues that have been brought to their attention. And then our Office of Global Diversity and Inclusion also this past fall, they brought the university together in a one-day symposium to talk about some of the issues that staff, faculty, and students are facing at PSU. And as an outcome of that, there are also actions that are happening. So I would say that there are efforts that are working in parallel there, but there could be a more coordinated effort to be in sync with what each and everybody is doing on campus.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate it, because what it also makes me think about is that students are always very engaged. And we probably did not see it this past fall because we were all basically having campus remotely because of COVID. But if we think about what campuses may have been like, if campus had opened in August after the summer that we had, we probably would have seen a lot more student engagement and student requesting of the kind of things that we're talking about. So I want you to join me, all of our attendees, in thanking our panelists today for an awesome conversation. And I think all of us ended up with some takeaways, some things that we can think about in our own institutions. Yes, there are still additional questions, but Cutsy is here, and this is not going to be the end of the conversation that Cutsy is actually moving forward on. So please check the Cutsy website. If you have things to add there, they can actually be shown there. The thing we will also mention to you is that we're happily able to announce our next webinar, which will be May 20th. It will start at 11 Central and it will last until 12:30 on May 20th. The title, Advancing Equity and Transportation Research. And so in that point, we want to start talking about how we as researchers engage maybe the community around us in our research. Hal, I think, talked a lot about making sure that our research is sensitive to equity issues as we go forward. And we really want to be kind of pushing ourselves on that. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about on May 20th. So I will, again, thank all of our panelists. Thank you, our attendees, for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you on May 20th. And we thank our steering committee and Chandra and Tracy for helping us to actually execute today. So most appreciative, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you again and continuing this conversation. So thank you for your attendance, and everyone have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Same
Thank you.